Coastal Georgia Audubon for a few years may know a little bit about Bob, but maybe not everything. And those who are new to to the group and to our meetings, I want to share some of Bob's background because Bob is our past president for Coastal Georgia Audubon. We were fortunate to have him leading the organization for 2 years, right?
2 years.
And still active on the board and living in Athens now, but still coming back to support us and things like this. So Dr. Cooper has been a professor for over 30 years, beginning his career at Humboldt State University, then moving to the University of Memphis, and finally winding back to the University of Georgia, where he began studying wildlife in 1970. Bob has authored over 100 peer-reviewed publications, as well as books, chapters, and other documents, and has co-authored more than 250 presentations at local, regional, and international professional meetings. He's also been awarded over the course of his career over $10 million in grant funding. He's been involved in large-scale conservation projects, collaborated with researchers and managers across a wide range of sites, and mentored countless graduate and undergraduate students, including doing his best to try to teach me statistics as a grad student, with some success, limited. Dr. Cooper specializes in wildlife ecology and management, non-game endangered species, including, of course, birds, and wildlife population dynamics. His research focuses on how human activities influence ecological systems and the services they provide. Birds are his primary focal species because they serve such important ecological roles and are often good ecological indicators. But his research has also touched on other disciplines, conservation biology, and landscape, population, behavioral, and restoration ecology. His outstanding work has influenced how these important natural resources are managed in the Southeast and has had lasting impact on how wildlife conservation is taught. A particular theme of Dr. Cooper's work is the study of how insectivorous bird populations interact with and control populations of their prey, which has advanced the understanding of how the insect food base drives bird survival and population dynamics. Bob's research has also been broader to include understanding the effects of climate change and other human impacts on a variety of bird habitats and species. He co-led a team of scientists, land managers, and policymakers to develop a biodiversity monitoring program for coastal habitats along the Gulf of Mexico in the wake of the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. He also served for several years as an advisor for Georgia. So we're delighted to welcome Bob back. He's a friend of mine and somebody I admire a lot as a scientist. So I hope you enjoy the talk.
Yeah.
Take it over.
Yeah. Wow. I'll try to live up to all that. He forgot to mention I'm retired now as well. But it's great to be back. It's always great to be back to the coast. And I have to admit, though, this talk, I'm going to give it, but most of the slides in this talk are actually courtesy of Bob Saddlemeyer. He's given a version of this talk several times, and I agreed to give it this time, but I've added a couple of little things as well, reflecting some current events and such, and things that will pertain to you as potential contributors to the Great Backyard Bird Count and some other stuff. But anyway, let me get started. So the talk outline, I'm going to talk a little bit about some background and about the Great Backyard Bird Count. And then a lot of, as the name suggests, the backyard bird count can be done just in your own backyard. It doesn't have to, though, as we've already found out. We're going to have a group at Jekyll Island on Saturday to do this. You just have to choose a spot, as you will see. But a lot of people just use their backyard. And that being the case, I wanted to talk a little bit about bird feeding and some issues with that. Then the bulk of the talk will be about some common winter birds in coastal Georgia, and then I'll end with just a a little bit more information about that field trip on Saturday. So anytime I have a group like this, I like to try to work into it what I think is a very important feature of birding in the United States. Every 5 years, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service puts out a report, and it's entitled The National Survey of Fishing, Hunting, and Wildlife Associated Recreation. And ever since they started doing this, the first one of these that came out, it just shocked people. Because what was discovered is that although the number of people that fish and the number of people that hunt is enormous, those numbers and their economic impact are dwarfed by the impact of wildlife watching, chief among which is birding. Wildlife watching, an estimated almost 150 million people watch wildlife, again, primarily birds, at home, at bird feeders and such. About 73 million people travel to do this, and together they spend approximately 250 billion, that's with a B, per year on their activities. And so this has a number of different ramifications, but the one really that pertains to the talk now is that this is a small army of people that can be put to work and with citizen science projects. And that's what the Great Backyard Bird Count is about. There's a lot of text here. I'll just run through this real quickly. This is a citizen science effort that's been put together by the Cornell Laboratory of Ornithology, Audubon, National Audubon, and Birds Canada. So it's all throughout North America. And basically all you have to do is, if you want to participate, is choose a spot, choose a site, and it can be literally your backyard. Watch birds for at least 15 minutes, hopefully more, at least once over a 4-day period between February 14th and 17th. Identify as many birds as you can and record them online. This can be done if you don't know birds at all. You can use the Merlin Bird ID app that will identify sounds that you hear. But people like us on Saturday, well, I won't be there, but like y'all, you can enter these data on eBird or on the eBird website. And so this will be done throughout the continent. And with this information, we get information about where, over time, we get information on species range expansions or contractions or movements. We get information on numbers, to some extent, of birds. We get information on bird health. Have you seen any diseased birds? And I'll talk about that a little bit here in a minute. And so this is going to be useful information that the Cornell Lab and others can use. So a little bit about bird feeding. Since, again, this is the backyard bird count, and I want to talk a little bit about the bird feeders that we might be surveying birds around. I think the key to bird feeding, and for any of this information I give, Gene and Bob and everybody else, if anybody has any comments or questions about anything I'm saying and want to add something, by all means, please do. When it comes to bird feeding, I think some people think that we do this to help the birds survive the winter. But that's not the case. Birds get along fine without our bird feeders or the seeds and other foods that we provide for them. They evolved through millennia to, without our help, and they can do it still without our help. We do it primarily because we enjoy it. And if if you want to attract the largest number of birds and largest diversity of birds, I think there are some basic tips, rules that we can follow. One of these is to provide a variety of food. Sunflower seeds are always a popular sort of food. Safflower chips. If we want to target species like American goldfinches or pine siskins, if they happen to be down in a winter when they're abundant, Niger thistle is what they go for. Avoid mixes with a lot of red millet, and try to use high quality seed. Gene, I'm going to put you on the spot. I heard you mention once you knew of a location that had consistently high quality seed. I think it was in Darien.
Yeah, the wood house. It's wood house. Anyway.
It's the feed and seed store.
Yeah, see me. It's up in Darien, and you can buy white thistle, 50-pound bags of white thistle, less than $1 a pound, and I think it's like $39 for 50 pounds, and that's sometimes hard to get. And I buy sunflower seeds from many different sources. The favorite seed right now, as far as I can tell from my birds in the country, is sunflower seeds.
Yeah.
The black oilers, that's what they prefer.
Yeah, black oil sunflower seeds. What I've been buying lately, actually we have a Wild Birds Unlimited in town, and I buy their no mess seed, which is very expensive, but the sunflower seeds in those mixes are already shelled. And so every bit of that gets eaten, every bit of it. And so it kind of makes up for the extra cost. And I'm getting some species in there that I've never seen at feeders. Hermit thrushes have been coming into my feeder this winter, and a couple of different warblers as well. And so that's another one. I think that's that if you have an opportunity to buy that, that's very high quality seed. And don't forget the suet. Suet feeders will bring in a lot of additional species. I've had orioles, mockingbirds, thrashers, catbirds, a number of different warblers, as well as the typical species that visit your feeder. Go for the suet. And I don't know if you've checked this out on our Facebook page, on Coastal Georgia Audubon Facebook page, but a gentleman named Lloyd Higgs has posted a number of really interesting photos and a video of his birds at his suet feeders, and he makes his own suet. And these are pine warblers that he actually gets to feed out of his hand, because they love this suet so much. And in this video, that's on our Facebook page, he showed a very busy day. I think it was right after the snowstorm, that there were at least 50 birds just flying around everywhere feeding on this suet. And furthermore, they weren't your typical cardinals and house finches and titmice and chickadees. These were all warblers and blue-headed vireos. It was astounding to see all these birds feeding on suet. So I haven't gotten around to making his recipe yet, but I'm going to do it. I'm going to give it a try. And so I recommend you look into that. There's some controversy, I suppose, about leaving hummingbird feeders up. There shouldn't be. Hummingbirds don't hang around longer than they should because you have a feeder up. If they're programmed to migrate south, and some stay around for the winter. And an interesting feature of ornithology here in southern Georgia, or in the South in general, is that for some reason we get some western hummingbirds that come over here and spend the winter. And so if you put up, if you have a hummingbird feeder and there are hummingbirds at it, keep it up. You might end up getting one of these Allens or Annas or Rufus hummingbirds or one of these other unusual western hummingbirds. You can also try an oriole feeder. Bob Saddlemeyer, I know, has put up an oriole feeder with fruit and that's jelly there, and he consistently gets Baltimore orioles and a number of different warbler species. And there's a nice male feeding on the jelly. You might need a canopy over this though, because a little bit of rain and it'll get messy. A cage around you. A problem with feeders I know that a lot of people have is with squirrels and other riffraff, but primarily squirrels. And a cage around your feeder will keep out the squirrels. We've used some other tricks. Baffles, of course, can if they're high enough off the ground, can keep squirrels out. Hot pepper, again, Wild Birds Unlimited sells hot pepper seed, and hot pepper, they're sort of like suet cakes, but they're cylindrical. And we don't have any problem with squirrels now. Plus, it's kind of comical to watch the first time the squirrel goes up there and tries to eat the seed. You can extend a rope between two trees and hang a feeder there if it's high enough off the ground. There are tricks to not worry about the to deal with the squirrel problem.
Oh, Bob,
Yeah.
go back to that. You want to attract people to live in a place that has low vegetation, probably get native nothing like this in the neighborhood. But they really like it.
Yeah, thank you. I forgot to mention that. That definitely white millet is what you use for painted bunnings. Clean your feeders. They should be done, and we're learning more and more about disease transmission in birds. I'm not an expert in this, but I have worked with colleagues that are. And it's more of a problem, I think, than we initially recognized. Ideally, every 2 weeks, clean them in a 10% solution of bleach, and you just let them dry for 30 minutes, and you're good to go. That doesn't harm the birds at all, and it's necessary to clean off feces and other bacteria that might accumulate on your feeders. They prevent the spread of diseases, especially problem diseases like conjunctivitis. That gross-looking bird on the right, that's a house finch. They're particularly susceptible to conjunctivitis, pink eye basically, but it's much more severe in finches. And of course, there are other diseases as well. Salmonella, avian pox are also problems. Also potentially, I suppose, bird flu, although the likelihood that wild birds that are feeding on our feeders that actually are carrying bird flu is very, very small. Now, I have seen no recommendations from any bird organizations to take your feeders down, with the exception of if you have chickens, you probably will want to take your feeders down. But other than that, I've seen no such recommendations with regard to bird flu. The last thing I'll mention about your backyard is that really what you can do that is going to be more beneficial than a feeder for birds will be to plant native vegetation. Native vegetation will provide nest sites for birds. Well, exotic would too, but in addition, they will provide, in many cases, fruit, such as this American beautyberry, but more importantly, they provide homes for insects. And the insects that will feed on their leaves, they're hosts for certain kinds of caterpillars and such that birds rely on as well. So we've had talks before on the benefits of native vegetation and the insects they provide. So I'm not going to go into more detail on that now. Okay, so let's look at some bird slides. I've got quite a few here. I don't know how long you want to hear me talk about birds in terms of bird identification. And so I'm just going to try to gauge what you guys are doing. If I see people, sort of nodding off and falling asleep, I'll cut it short. But I do want to cover the land birds, the birds we're more likely to see in forests and fields and in your backyard, as opposed to the water birds. So there are a number of warblers that winter on the Georgia coast, and that's one of the many cool things about birding here is that we do get a few more winter warblers than we even do in Athens, or at least they're a bit more common. And here's the first one. This is the orange-crowned warbler, and I tell people that this bird can be identified by the fact it has no distinguishing field marks at all. It's sort of olive gray. It has no eye ring. Although it has sort of eye arcs, little white spots on above and below the eye. It has no wing bars. It has no white outer tail feathers. It's not particularly brightly colored in the rump or the underside, although it's a little bit more yellow there. But if you see a warbler that doesn't look like anything, that's an orange-crowned warbler. And it doesn't have an orange crown. You really can't see much of one. And they're here just in the winter. Black and white warbler, called that for obvious reasons. This bird is really a striking bird. You might look at it and say, okay, well, it's black and white, but that's not particularly exciting. It's not brightly colored or anything like that. But its patterning is just spectacular, and it's actually my wife's favorite bird, and I can see why. It's really a beautiful bird. It's an interesting behavior too. Unlike the perching habits of most warblers, it behaves more like a nuthatch, spending a lot of time on the trunks of trees. We have these in Athens, but they're not as abundant there as they are here. Palm warbler. These are pretty common here in the winter. You see them along roadsides and open areas along trails. For example, Altamaha Wildlife Management Area, they're pretty common. Again, you can identify them frequently by their behavior. They're a tail twitcher, like not that different from a phoebe. And so right away you see a small bird twitching its tail like that, and they're usually pretty low to the ground. That's likely to be a palm warbler. But the distinguishing field mark for this guy are these yellow undertail coverts. So the yellow rump warbler has a yellow rump on the dorsal side, but these guys have yellow on the underside. The pine warbler, which we were just looking at, is another very common winter bird, although actually they do also breed here. The amount of yellow on a wintering pine warbler will be quite variable. Some seemingly have almost none, and others are quite yellow, like this guy here. White wing bars, yellow eye ring, a pretty distinctive and very common winter warbler. Yellow-throated warbler also breeds here, but we have some that spend the winter here, and it's always nice to see that really nice spot of yellow on an otherwise very striking bird as well. Common yellowthroat is aptly named. The male has this nice black mask. Female does not have that mask, is a little more drab. But they're quite common here in marshy type situations, and usually down low in scrubby, shrubby sorts of habitat. And everybody's favorite warbler, until you're trying to find other warblers in the flock of 50 or 100 yellow rump warblers, is the yellow rump warbler. And undoubtedly our most common winter warbler, as is the case throughout the rest of the South. And you can't see it here in this slide, but it would have this bright yellow rump that isn't always visible. So the first time you put your binoculars on a warbler and you don't see that yellow rump, keep looking because because it could be a yellow rump warbler, but they have the little bit of yellow on the side, mild streaking on the chest as well. One of my favorite winter birds is the land birds, is the blue-headed vireo. Still a very striking bird, even in the winter plumage, with those sort of a dark gray head and those white spectacles. It really is a very striking bird. They're also very, what's the word? They're not rambunctious, but senior moment. But anyway, they're behaviorally they're interesting. They make interesting little cooing sounds, pairs to each other around the nest. They're not afraid to loudly scold you or other birds. And in fact, that's how you can find one in the forest frequently, is by listening for that very distinctive scold call that they have. And with vireos in general, they look similar to warblers, and they behave similar to warblers as well, foraging in foliage and in the canopy, or maybe down a little bit lower. But their bills are a good bit thicker. They're also somewhat slower in their foraging movements, but otherwise they look pretty much like a warbler. American robin. Everybody knows what a robin looks like, but I've included it here because we don't have these guys. These guys don't breed here, but they do winter here, and so they're included. They also, it's an opportunity to talk about fruit in the wintertime. These guys, of course, eat a lot of insects. Everybody's seen robins eating earthworms and such. But in the fall and winter, they largely switch over to fruit, not entirely though. And so fruit and fruiting shrubs and fruiting trees are important for a number of these species. Robin is one, and this guy in particular, the cedar waxwing, is almost entirely dependent on fruit in the wintertime. And one of my great joys in birding in the wintertime is seeing a flock of cedar waxwings. I will always stop and watch these guys figuring out ways to pluck fruit off of the branches of the tree in which they're feeding. And of course they're so named because of the little red, these curious little red patches that are seemingly kind of waxy on their secondary flight feathers. On the secondaries, and then also the yellow tips of the tail. But when you see them at a distance, they just kind of look like brown birds. But it's really, if you get them in your binoculars up close, or if you see them up close, you see how really strikingly beautiful this bird is. And to be able to see a whole flock of them doing their thing is just a lot of fun. And the hermit thrush. Thrushes, identification of thrushes has always been difficult to me in the spring, and that's one reason why I like the hermit thrush so much, because that's an easy one. They are brown pretty much throughout, with the spots on the chest, but that reddish brown tail is the distinguishing field mark for these guys. I actually had a student who studied hermit thrushes in the wintertime down here on the coast, and she found, we assumed that they ate almost entirely fruit in the wintertime, but they don't. They eat a lot of, well, they do eat fruit, and that's a lot of their diet, but they also eat insects. And we found actually that the birds that were most likely to survive the winter were ones that had large percentages of insects in their diet. So they require a balanced diet, and insects are important for these guys as well as fruit. Kinglets. The ruby-crowned kinglet is undoubtedly our most common kinglet, only here in the winter. A very sort of hyperactive little guy, even more active than the warblers. It otherwise behaves much like a warbler. They're a little bit smaller than a warbler. The white eye ring is very distinctive in the ruby-crowned kinglet, and the small wing bars. You hardly ever see the ruby crown, but occasionally you do in the male, but usually he doesn't show that. Our other kinglet is much less common, the golden crown kinglet, and aptly named. You can see here the why it's called that, and it's the sort of underside of these birds is strikingly white. It's much more of a contrast to me between the underside and the dorsal side of these birds, and their wing bars are more distinctive as well. Eastern phoebe is our common winter flycatcher. And of course, there are a number of things that make this bird a pretty easy one to identify. One is that it frequently says its name. And although not always, it gives a number of different calls. But they'll still be active in catching insects on the wing in the winter. They do switch over to fruit when it's really, really cold and there are no insects. The amount of, this bird is fairly yellow on the underside, but the amount of yellow on a phoebe will be somewhat variable. And one thing that I always look for with a phoebe, again, you're not going to have trouble with this in the winter because it's the only flycatcher around. But in the spring, they kind of look like somebody has maybe a sooty thumb and just kind of rubbed it across the head of the bird. And so they have this little sooty splotch sort of on the top of their head. In terms of woodpeckers, the only one I'm going to show here is our winter visitor, the yellow-bellied sapsucker. And it's a pretty distinctive woodpecker compared with our other common woodpeckers, the downy or the red-bellied, that I think everybody's familiar with. But the sort of salt and pepper speckling on the back is distinctive and of course the yellow on the chest and the red patches on the head and throat are all distinctive for this species. Couple of finches here. Anybody know what these are? What's the guy on the left? That's an American goldfinch. And I think everybody, not everybody, I don't know what your birding background is individually, but you know what my students would say when I take them birding and would see an American goldfinch, they'd say, "Why isn't it gold? Why isn't it bright yellow?" And of course, this is the way they look in the wintertime. They're eating sunflower seeds here, but like I was saying before, they really go for the thistle if you want to put some of that out. How about these guys here? Yeah, they're not house finches. They look, the coloration is very, very similar, but these are purple finches. And it's a little challenging to tell them apart. The bill is a little bigger on a purple finch. In the female bird, the brown marking in the head is a good bit more bold, and the streaking on the chest, which you can't really see very well here, but it is much more bold than in a house finch. The streaks on a house finch are not as dark. Also, on the underside, there's a good white patch in the lower belly in the purple finch. The house finch doesn't have that. And last, but the male has the red on the male. It really, well, I was going to say it's a little brighter, but that isn't necessarily the case. It is overall a more robust looking bird, but it does take a little practice to tell those two apart. House finches are only here in the winter. We have goldfinches year round. Okay, so this is a house wren, and we have these guys just in winter. It's pretty much, this isn't the best slide, Bob. You can slap me later. House finches, house wrens. Well, wrens are small birds with very, very active, very sort of. Again, I'm having trouble with the word. All right. They frequently cock their tail up. They're sort of sassy birds. And so behaviorally, they're quite vocal. They will usually have a variety of vocalizations, different kinds, including a number of different sort of scold calls. But anyway, in terms of visual features, the house wren, to me, is sort of the orange crown warbler of the wrens. It doesn't have much in the way of striking field marks.
So
That's a good slide, yeah. Whoop. I thought I was going backwards. Hold on. Okay, there we go. All right, house wren. Sparrows. Everybody loves sparrows. My students, the first time we go out to a sparrow field and focus on sparrows, they'd just shake their heads and go, "Are these going to be on the exam?" And I'd tell them, "Yeah, but it's going to be about half sparrows, and the other half will be shorebirds." Yeah. No, we'd only have a couple, and they would be easy. But sparrows are, at the end of the day, in terms of identification, they're just like any other group. there are ways to narrow them down into smaller groups, and they each will have distinguishing characteristics. It just takes time to learn them. This is from the American Birding Association, and these facial characteristics of these different sparrows are depicted in sort of cartoon form. And I found this very useful. This is a great slide, Bob. And so you can use something like this. But that said, the first thing I tell my students is that you can break sparrows down into two groups: those that have streaked breasts and those that have unstreaked breasts. And then, though, you see something like this. And does this bird have a streaked breast or an unstreaked breast? It looks streaked, doesn't it? But it's a white-throated sparrow, and because it's an immature, it has a streaked breast. White-throated sparrows typically do not have a streaked breast. And so you have birds that kind of look like sort of both. And so you just have to rely on particular field characteristics that takes time to learn, and also in behavioral characteristics, type of habitat they're in, anything it takes to identify that particular bird. The white-throated sparrow always has this yellow spot in a location called the lore. The lore is the spot between the bill and the eye, and in this case, they have that little yellow spot there. Two really cool sparrows that we have here that formerly were both the same, considered the same species, the sharp-tailed sparrow, now have been divided into two different species: Nelson's sparrow and the salt marsh sparrow. They both live in salt marshes. They both just winter here, as does the white-throated sparrow. But Nelson's, salt marsh sparrow here on the right, the streaks are a little more pronounced. They're darker, and the bill is supposed to be yellowish. It doesn't really look like it there. You can't always rely on bill color. Nelson's is the streaks are a little a little fainter, but those are our two marsh sparrows that winter here. We also have the seaside sparrow, but we don't have they're here year-round, so we don't have a slide of those guys. The savanna sparrow, as the name suggests, we see that in fields, along roadsides, places like that, and they kind of look like a song sparrow. So they have a streaked breast, frequently with a spot in the chest. But what I use to figure out a savanna sparrow is that they kind of, even when they fly, you can see it. They kind of have a yellow sort of wash over the head. That it's not like it's really, that you can't say they have a yellow head, but they just sort of, it's described this way in Sibley as well, that they kind of have this yellow wash on the head, and that's sort of their overall, what you'll frequently hear people refer to as the jizz, the general impression of size and shape. Their jizz includes this yellow wash. Here's the song sparrow. Again, a streaked breast with a dark spot in the center, or in the center of the chest. A distinctive gray and brown pattern in the head, and one of our most common sparrows, wintering sparrows. And here's our white-throated sparrow. And even this adult kind of has some streaking on the chest, doesn't it? Oh, well. But they have they're supposed to have unstreaked breasts. The chipping sparrow is one of our most common birds at bird feeders. as is the white-throated and song sparrow. Chipping sparrow does have an unstreaked breast, and that chestnut cap is distinctive, as well as the white stripe, a superciliary stripe just above the eye, and is a distinctive sparrow. And then our swamp sparrow, which is again only here in the winter. This is a very pretty sparrow. A lot of other people, like my students, would just say, well, they're just a bunch of little brown birds. But this guy in particular, to me, is striking and is very beautiful. The sort of reddish brown patches on the wings are very striking. And this particular bird does not have as much gray as just the way that it looks. It doesn't have as much gray in the face as I've seen, but the grayish head is rather distinctive as well. And the Henslow sparrow. This is a very secretive sparrow. You're only likely to see it. Well, I suppose they occur in like power line rights away, but they're common in longleaf pine stands that have a grassy ground cover, and they're just a beautiful sparrow. They're sort of they sort of have a yellowish, maybe light brownish wash over the body, but the head is this olive green that is quite striking. Just a beautiful sparrow. And on one of our field trips, we would catch Henslow sparrows, and would pull them out of the net and show them to the students, and they came away with a different impression of what sparrows look like. Okay, so we've been going about an hour. Shall I keep going, or? All right, I'll keep going.
Marsh birds. You gotta do marsh birds.
Yeah, you got to do marsh birds. One of my favorite birds is, and we're switching gears here now. I'm going to talk about some bigger birds. Is the American bittern, and it is the size of a heron, and it is in the heron family. But they will frequently be, rather than being out in the open, like and feeding there like a lot of herons and egrets do, they tend to be more in vegetation like this. And in fact, I don't know if any of you have ever seen a bittern do its sort of hiding strategy where it just sticks its bill up in the air. This bird isn't quite doing it, but it's designed to blend in with this sort of marshy vegetation. I've seen birds that do that. Even birds you surprise that are out in the open, they'll do this. And they're not hiding from anybody. I saw a least bittern do that once up in a tree. Do that. The sora is a very common marsh bird, but is very secretive. Birds we call marsh birds. Most of them are in the family Rallidae, that are in the order. They're in the order with cranes and rails. But anyway, the Rallidae are frequently described as secretive marsh birds, and that's what they all are. They're difficult to see, so you have to be patient. If you see some movement on the edge of a marsh, just hang out there for a bit, and maybe maybe it is one of these secretive marsh birds, and it might come out for a minute for you to see it. Our most common rail, of course, is the clapper rail in our salt marshes here on the coast. Soras occur in salt marshes as well, but also more, I would say, in fresh marshes. And they have that sort of distinctive black mask here and yellow bill. Otherwise, a rather small bird, looks like a small chicken. And the Virginia rail, which kind of looks like a small clapper rail, but a bit more of a contrast in the head. I would say in the gray in the head and the reddish brown in the body. Again, a bird that winters here. Yeah, this is a shorebird actually that lives in marshes. The snipe, the Wilson snipe, and it looks like a shorebird. Has the impossibly long bill, long legs, and lives in marshy types of situations. Feeds in water, but the Wilson snipe is a bit more in marshes or in mud, sort of on the edge of marshes and tidal mud flats and places like that. Some winter raptors. One that we have here just in winter is the merlin, which is a falcon. And when you see one, you might initially think it's a peregrine falcon, but the peregrine falcon will have a very distinctive dark hood and with very sharp contrasting features, or tends to, whereas the merlin has similar types of coloration, but it's not as bold as the peregrine falcon, and it's considerably smaller than the peregrine falcon. But it has the falcon wings, long pointed wings, sort of pointed tail, very streamlined, a very fast flyer. They'll chase down shorebirds or any bird really for food. The American kestrel also is a falcon. We see these guys on power lines as well as in more wooded or areas that have some open area along with it. They need some open areas to hunt. But they have a good bit more brown, brown and sort of dark gray in their coloration. The males are grayer, females are browner. And then the northern harrier, which is definitely typical of marshy type situations. These guys, I probably should have said something about size of kestrels and merlins. They're larger than larger than a robin, but not much larger than a robin. Smaller than a crow. The harrier, though, is a good bit larger, about the size of a red-shouldered hawk, maybe a little bit larger. Females are brown, males are gray. Like a lot of raptors, the females are larger than the males, and their flight behavior is interesting. They tend to fly low over marshes. We found a roost once of northern harriers, and there were a bunch of pellets there that they had regurgitated. And we found a lot of mammals, small mammals in there, but we also found a lot of birds. They apparently are able, as they fly along, they kind of will, if they see something, they'll stall, they'll tilt their wings so that they go straight up and drop straight down, and they can surprise a marsh bird. We found a number of Virginia rail remains in the pellets.
So pellet regurgitation is not just an owl thing?
No, all raptors regurgitate pellets. Owls and hawks do that. Yeah, and it's usually it's a mass of bone and fur, and you can pick apart and see what they've been eating. But the major field mark for the northern harrier, and it's very striking, it's unmistakable, is that white rump patch. Shorebirds, yay, shorebirds. I could give a whole talk on shorebirds. but I'm just going to just mention a few things. This is another challenging group. It's sort of advanced birding. And like any other group, there are ways to just break them down into smaller groups and then learn those characteristics that separate species within each one of those groups. And the first way to do that, I think, is by size. There are a number of large shorebirds that are about crow size, medium-sized shorebirds, maybe about robin size, and then small shorebirds that are only a little bit larger than a sparrow. And each one of these, and the large group are really pretty easy to tell apart. I was at Gould's Inlet today before coming over here, and I saw a marbled godwit. It's always good to see one there. This bird is about crow size, and it has this really long bill that is slightly upturned. And it has this sort of rich brown color, although much more so in breeding plumage than in the winter plumage. Yeah. And then talk about upturned bills. That type of bill is called a recurved bill, and the American avocet has the most recurved bill. This is my favorite shorebird because that bill is just outrageous. And when they feed, they will move it back and forth like a scythe in the mud. And when they encounter a little invertebrate or some other little wiggly, they can snap down on it and catch it real quick. Those are the only two large shorebirds I'm going to show. Moving on to the medium group, ruddy turnstones are pretty common here. They're little plump little guys, a little bit bigger than a robin, I guess, or about robin size, but they're fatter. And they have this sort of short bill and sort of a harlequin pattern in the head and neck. The black-bellied plover is here in the foreground. Plovers are in a different family than most of the rest of the shorebirds, and their bills are shorter. They tend to feed on the surface of the mud. The black-bellied plover is our largest wintering plover, and it looks pretty indistinct, nothing really distinctive about it, except when they fly. They have black armpits, so that's a way to tell a black-bellied plover. The dunlin is actually a little bit smaller, but it's one of our most common shorebirds, and it has a slightly, it would be larger than a sparrow, smaller than a robin, but it has that slightly drooping bill that you can see in this slide. But just to give you an idea, this is the black-bellied plover in the breeding plumage. And so almost all shorebirds that I'm aware of, molt twice a year, and they go from this breeding plumage that frequently is very striking like this to a much drabber winter plumage. Dowitchers are a little bit larger than a robin. I guess, again, we're in the medium-sized group. There were a bunch of dowitchers at Gould's Inlet today. Behaviorally, they're easy to identify because when they're feeding, they kind of are moving their bills down in the substrate up and down like a sewing machine. But you kind of can't tell it here because the bird is sort of moving away at an angle, but their bills are really long compared to the size of the body. Another plover that's fairly common here, a threatened species, federally threatened species, is the piping plover. And they do this funny little foot shake. They'll move along and they'll raise one foot and shake it. But a very light colored plover, much lighter than any of the other birds out there, except for the sanderling, which is a sandpiper, not a plover, and will have a longer bill. Yeah. No, cool, very cool. And don't we have a piping plover, Sarah, on is it Cumberland? Is that where it was? Yeah, and the bird's named Gabby, and that's as Sarah alluded to, refers to the pattern of color bands that are on the legs, and that's how we track these birds from year to year to year without actually having to catch them. We can sight them from a distance and look at their color band pattern: green, aluminum, Fish and Wildlife Service band. Blue and yellow, or blue and yellow, yeah. Wilson's plover is a little bit, oh yeah, and these guys are smaller. We're down into the smaller group now. So they're a little larger than a sparrow. Wilson's plover is a little bit larger than the piping plover, and their bills are large compared to most other plovers. I'd say that it kind of looks like it has a little cigar in its mouth. And they do breed here. Our most common plover is the semi-palmated plover, and it has a single black band across the chest and brown above, white below, orange legs, very common. And our smallest sandpiper is the least sandpiper. There are a number of different species of sandpipers that are these small guys that are of the genus Calidris, and they are collectively referred to as peeps. So you'll hear people say, okay, well, we see a bunch of peeps out here. I can't tell what species they are, which is usually what I'm saying. But the least sandpiper is the only one that has yellow legs. So that's a way to tell those guys. And here's our Dunlin. Oh no, I'm sorry. That's a western sandpiper. And the way that I know that is a western sandpiper. But if you're just looking at a shorebird by itself, I frequently will have difficulty telling exactly what species it is because I need something for size reference. And so I find it much easier to tell shorebirds when there's a bunch of them together and I can see different sizes relative to each other. To me, this looks very much like a Dunlin. The bill is the right length compared to the size of the head. The bill droops a little bit, but this bird is much smaller. You can't tell that in this slide. But that's a western sandpiper. Reddish egret is a bird that doesn't breed here, but it kind of wanders up the coast occasionally from Florida. And they're quite interesting to watch forage. They run around flapping their wings, trying to flush fish, which they'll chase down. Northern gannet is one of our common seabirds that comes down from Newfoundland and Nova Scotia, where it breeds in large colonies, and they just hang out off the coast. And occasionally you'll be lucky enough to see one with binoculars if it flies close, but pretty much you need a spotting scope and just keep looking out there, and you'll see these guys diving into the water for fish, either in this adult plumage or in the drabber immature plumage. But they're enormous birds. big as pelicans. Northern gannet. In terms of gulls, our common, maybe our most common wintering gull is, and one of the prettiest, is Bonaparte's gull. And it has this little black spot behind the eye, which is distinctive, and also the wing pattern of dark and light is very distinctive as well. And they're smaller. They're a smaller gull, about the size of a little bigger than a Forster's tern, I guess. And I think this is my last slide. The horned grebe, we see these out in the ocean. They are, no, it's not, it's the second to last slide. And this is, no, it's not, third to last. Well, it's not the last slide. Horned grebe in winter plumage is this, they're kind of cute little guys, almost no tail, fairly small, smaller than a crow, larger than a robin. And there's sort of a sharp border between the head, the dark and the head, and the light in the head. Our more common grebe, of course, is the pied-billed grebe, so named for its black and white pattern on the bill. Common loon in the winter plumage, nowhere near as striking as the breeding plumage, but still one of the neatest birds that we have here in the winter, frequently seen out in the ocean or in protected bay areas diving for fish. And this is our last slide. There are a number of ducks. I guess I could have included here some of the sea ducks, etc. But maybe our most common winter visitor, easiest to see, is the hooded merganser. You know it's that winter's coming when you look out in the marsh and you see a small flock of hooded mergansers swimming around in tidal creeks of any size. You'll see these guys, and of course the male is extremely striking. So that's it for the slides. And the last thing I wanted to do here is just revisit this and remind you that there is this field trip on Saturday. We will gather at 8 a.m. at the entrance to the Morgan Center on Jekyll Island, and the map of where that is located is again on the Facebook page, the Coastal Georgia Audubon Society Facebook page. But it's close to where the museum is when you first come onto Jekyll Island, take a left and go towards the old town. And that's where, if you see a bunch of nerdy people standing around with binoculars, you know who it is. I'm just